client. Our client today is True Africa. True Africa is a media and tech company at the intersection of business and culture. So we have 3 workshop coordinators. The 3 are Dr. Gordon Adomdza, who you've heard from already today. He's an innovation and entrepreneurship professor at Ashesi University College in Accra, Ghana. We also have Claude Grunitzky, who is the chairman and editor of True Africa. And we also have Marvitha Panapati. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name. I think I got permission from her to do that. She's a chapter organizer of Open IDEO Boston. So I'm going to hand it off to Gordon to get us started, and welcome to the workshop. Let's get our hands ready.
I am going to start by asking Gordon, come have a seat up here, have a seat up here. We are really lucky today because we have some practitioners of design thinking in the room. Yes, they're academics, yes, it's theoretical, but they really put design thinking into practice in diverse contexts to serve diverse needs. And they're also experts at teaching it. So I hope that you can walk away today with some really concrete skills that you can take into your daily life. But I know a lot of you who here has heard of design thinking before? Okay, so we're about 50% of the room. Who feels like they could stand up here and tell everyone exactly what it is and how to do it? Okay, so we're at, I see 1.5. I see 1 and 2 halves, so I see 2 people. So we're going to just start by a brief introduction as to what is design thinking to give you a taste of how it differs from the typical ideation process or the typical product development process. So, Gordon, what is design thinking and why is it important?
Okay. I can start, right?
Yeah.
All right. What is design thinking? I think the joke between friends of mine and I is that if you ask that question, and the person sort of rushes to answer, they're fake. They're not real. Because it's one of those concepts that it's really tough to define because you can come at it from so many different angles. So I'm going to come at it from a different angle. So I encountered design thinking here at West Newton at Design Continuum in 2009. Design Continuum invented, quote unquote, the Swiffer. Everybody knows what the Swiffer is, right? Unit with a stick on it, you can use it to mop up the kitchen floor. Now, when they told me the story about how it was invented, P&G came to them and said, we want to redesign our fluid dispenser bottles. And they said, how about we study cleaning? Let's understand how cleaning is done at the kitchen household level. So that's point number 1. They took what we describe as a systems perspective to the problem and didn't just focus on the narrow problem that they had, right? They wanted to understand the context of the problem a little bit so that they can catch all the stakeholders or the different factors that impact the problem. So they went out and studied people cleaning their kitchen floors. They got an HR company to hire these people, and they told them specifically, do not clean your kitchen before we come, right? But when they got there, every single one of them was spotless. So they learned something, people value this concept of quick cleaning, being able to clean quickly when visitors are coming in. They set up cameras, they watch people clean, and they noticed 2 things. I'm simplifying the story quite a bit, and you might have heard a different version, but I like this version. They set up cameras to watch people clean, and they noticed 2 things. One is that people were using multiple tools to clean, right? So people use a spot cleaner, take the broom, sweep, get a mop, bucket, soap, water, and people were also cleaning something very interesting. People were cleaning the mop as much as they were cleaning the floor. Right? You see that? So, insights, right? Unusual insights, not from handing out 1,000 surveys or going into a lab and sort of looking at some processes, but watching people clean. So that's a very important method in design thinking. And then they came to a point of view, and that was that and again, this part of this is me making this up, but part of the point of view would have been that people needed a tool that combined multiple tools and did not need to be cleaned whilst being used. You see that refer? You see that refer, right? A tool that combines multiple tools that does not need to be cleaned whilst being used. Strong point of view that then sort of forces a flurry of ideas. And we're going to talk about how my tweets in a little bit, right? Opens up the design frame and then people can throw different ideas at it. The Swiffer became a multi-billion-dollar category for P&G, changed the way they do innovation and stuff like that, right? So I proceeded to introduce this to my class. So this is 2009, failed at many different approaches, but it worked over time. And then this is at Northeastern University. So about 2 years ago, when midlife crisis hit, I started asking all those questions of, what impact am I making in life? I only have 25 years more. And so I ended up in Ghana teaching design thinking. It makes a little more sense. Sometimes I regret it, but. So design thinking, the Gordon definition, is a problem-solving approach that is user-centered, takes a systems perspective, and because it takes a systems perspective when you're combining so many different data formats and all that, it often will lead to a creative outcome. Should I say that again? A creative problem-solving approach takes a systems perspective and will often lead to a creative outcome. And so I think the reason why it's taken off is that most problems have been solved in this oftentimes we're very used to, if I ask you a question, you throw the answer at me you don't need to sort of you want to show how smart you are, right? So design thinking is about just pausing and going to do some research and coming back and doing all these elaborate analysis and mapping out the process and coming to a point of view and doing ideation. And because it sort of breaks down a problem space in that much detail, you will definitely find something interesting. So a lot of people are starting to sort of see this as the way to solve problems. So very excited to see how we can do all those things and engage very well with Claude here today.
I'd like to ask you a quick question, Claude. Who is your target user for True Africa?
Young Africans in Africa and also in the diaspora. And I want to find a way, this is a good opportunity to frame this problem, this challenge that I have right now. So I've been a media entrepreneur my entire adult life. I started a first venture when I was 24 years old that started as a small magazine and then grew to be a very big and influential media company called Trace in Africa. And so what I saw was a real hockey stick. I started my first month, we had about 10,000 readers for the magazine, and now the total audience is about 100 million. So when I sold the company in 2010, so I haven't been involved in quite a few years. But what's really happened is, for me, right now, I started another company called True Africa, and I started about a year and a half ago, and we're facing a real challenge. We have grown organically across Facebook to about 416,000 likes, but on Instagram, we're really small. We only have about 12,000 users right now, and the learnings that I had from my former career as an entrepreneur is that it's all about partnerships, and you can scale through partners. So I was able to partner with other people who helped the company to grow, even though I was always much better in the early phase. I'm always really good at starting, but when the company scales, that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging, and that's when I bring in different partners. And so right now, I'm trying to solve this problem of how do we grow our Instagram audience, which is only 12,000, and there's a big discrepancy between our 12,000 audience on Instagram and the 400,000 that we were able to grow at True Africa over a 1 year period. So that's the main issue that we're facing right now.
Great, thank you so much. Beyond the 5% bump we can probably get with everyone in this room subscribing. we want to think about systemic approaches to really amp up the Instagram user base, not just to get numbers, but also media companies are there to engage, they're there to inform. And Instagram has become a very important platform for, I would say, very design-focused millennials, very conscious millennials, and getting Instagram to be a really strong part of your portfolio can be a really powerful tool. We don't have the time, as I said, to go out and do user research, but quickly, who in this room has an Instagram account? Okay. Who would describe themselves as young or young at heart? I see some young looking people not raising their hands. Guess you have some old souls. Who here would describe themselves as African, living in Africa, or a member of the African diaspora? Right. So a lot of you are users or potential users. So treat each other as resources. You can do your research among each other just sitting at the table and think of some really cool ideas that we can start testing immediately in market. You can say that today, April 8th, 2017, like you really helped solve a problem for a company and unlock the next phase of growth, and that's really exciting to be able to do in an hour. So I'm going to pass it back to Gordon to talk a little bit about how we get from this big nebulous how do we convert Facebook users to Instagram users to actually tactical problem statements that we can start to solve.
Okay, so that's the concept of framing a problem, which is one of the key stages of the design thinking process. So how do we frame a problem? So the idea is that a lot of companies fail at this. They solve either the wrong problem or they come at the right problem from the wrong perspective. So in this space, there's certain tools, and as you probably are familiar with it, certain tools that are used in design thinking. One of the tools here is called the how might we statements. Yeah. The how might we statements. And what they do is that they give you a workable frame, but also allow you to have enough breadth so that you can sort of feel free to ideate. So just a couple of things about the how might we, I like bringing historical stories to a lot of this. So the history is that it was started by this guy called Min Basador, who was a creative manager at P&G in early 70s. And at the time, they were competing with Colgate Palmolive on the Irish Spring soap, bar soap. Have you seen that Irish Spring bar soap with the stripes? And all they were trying to do was to create a better striped bar soap. Right? That was what the team was focused on. So he came at it and was using this concept of how might we create a more refreshing soap of our own. And the point here is that, that those three words in the statement are going to Tim Brown video. The how gives the user, the designer, creative confidence, right? So, and then the might shows that there are possibilities. And of course, the we is about doing it together, you know. So how might we, very important in the design thinking process. So what are the steps? We often have to take the problem and break it down into actionable pieces, if you will. Actionable pieces. And then take each piece, if you will, and attach or use the how might we statement on it. So we're going to go to the problem again, and then we're going to try to get a breakdown. Should we write that down?
Yeah. So if we were to pithily say the problem statement in one sentence, correct me if I'm wrong, we want to unlock the Instagram user base so that it rivals or surpasses the Facebook user base?
That's a really good way of framing it.
Great.
maybe Claude, you can help us sort of identify certain steps that could go into this process of unlocking the
Okay,
user base.
so yeah, so there's two things that are happening on Instagram right now for those who have an account. Video is growing very, very fast with Instagram stories, and also Instagram is a great platform for quote-unquote influencers. So one of the things we want to do is identify the people who are extremely influential across Instagram, people who have, say, 50,000, 100,000 followers, and find a way to partner with them so that we can piggyback on their success and then aggregate these influencers into a growing user base.
So find influencers.
Identify them and finding a way to work with them in the partnerships that I described earlier.
Do we have any people who would consider themselves influencers in this room? Anyone with 50K followers or more? 25K? 1K? Okay, so someone back here with 1K followers, why do you think you have 1,000 people following you on Instagram?
Because I've been on it long enough and I'm active.
Okay, so activity matters and duration matters, yes?
So this is more of a question.
Yeah.
Just having come back from Nigeria recently, one of the things I've observed is that Instagram is a huge data hog. And everyone I know of in Nigeria does not like Instagram because it sucks up so much data. So they actually turn it off. So my question is, and how might we, I think we need to add, how might we find out why people are preferring Facebook or Instagram?
That's a great question. That's one way to frame it too, to figure out what is driving this behavior, because it's not like youth are not connected on social media. Another way to look at that could be, how might we build an Instagram following without having people connecting to it all the time? Or how might we reduce the data consumption of our followers on Instagram? So both sides of the coin. Great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes?
Actually, I have two clarifying questions, clarification questions.
Yeah?
You did this on the design thinking mentality. How long have you had your Facebook accounts? How long have you had the Instagram one? What are the social media platforms are you on? And do you have a uniform message you're trying to drive on a few of them, or you're trying to get to different, are you trying to accomplish different things in each one of them? And what have you done so far to get to 13K so that we don't, duplicate the work like that?
Okay. Did you capture all of that?
I did.
Great.
And so yeah, should I answer that right now?
Go right
I feel
ahead.
like the Instagram is very much based on photography and very few words, right? That's how they grew. That's what made the brand. And so the people who have gravitated towards us kind of instinctively on Instagram are people pretty much in the creative industries, in that sense. Whereas Facebook allowed us to go wide, to cast a wider net, and we just grabbed a bunch of people. But it just so happens that Facebook owns Instagram. So now there are new ways to share data and content across both platforms.
Have you had this both for the same length of time? Have you had Instagram?
No, that's a great one. We started Instagram late because I didn't realize that it was going to grow exponentially. And initially, I realized that Facebook was the social network for Africans, and we focused on that. And we started Instagram maybe 6 months later.
How did you grow Facebook? I never just inquired. How did you grow to 400,000 Facebook? Was it random, or did you have a strategic way to get those people who like it?
What happened with Facebook is that because we were publishing content every day, we published 6 or 7 articles every day, we were able to attract people based on different interests that they might have. But then, and then one final thing on this, Facebook changed their algorithm about a year ago, which made it much more difficult for publisher content to appear in people's feeds. So our growth has kind of stalled over the past 6 to 9 months on Facebook, which is why we want to now focus on Instagram as well.
Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions and then we're going to finish the framing. So I will take the one at the back table.
Okay, so it's not a question, it's just in reference to what she was saying. The entry barriers to both social networks are not the same, especially for the African audience. Facebook right now is free through internet protocol using an NFL SIM, and you don't even really need a high smartphone, just with a small phone, even a Symbian or whatsoever can access that. So the growth rate cannot be compared to all also the audience on the Instagram may be high, and you can also compare them with the market here. You know, Wi-Fi is largely accessible here, other than back in Africa where Wi-Fi is not a big asset. So I feel you shouldn't even be comparing that. That comparison is not proportional, first of all, because of the barrier to the market. And the company, Facebook's focus on both companies are not equal. So because they know Instagram is for more educated, less people than Facebook.
I think that brings up a really good framing question, right? It's how do you define success? Is it equal numbers of people on Facebook or Instagram, but maybe it's equal cumulative wealth of the people on Facebook and Instagram? I'm not a media company, I don't understand media all that well, but I assume that the purchasing power of your readership helps you secure advertisements, right?
Well, that's exactly, I mean, I think that is the single most important question and clarification. Thank you for bringing it up. We don't want to be all things to all people. We realize that we over-index with the creative communities. And we also over-index with people in major metropolitan areas in Africa. And as a result, we'd rather target those people who tend to be bigger on Instagram than try to get to 1 or 2 million on Facebook, which, you know, even at 1 or 2 million on Facebook, you're not a player. So for us, we feel like our DNA is more aligned with Instagram users.
Okay, so one last question over here.
Excuse me. You mentioned Facebook bought Instagram.
Right.
If I were buying Instagram, I'd have to have a business model for how am I going to grow Instagram. So I'd be interested in knowing what is Facebook's plan for growing Instagram, and how are they going to use it, and how could you piggyback off of that bit of business model to make it useful to you?
Okay.
Any ex-Facebookers in this room? Current Facebookers? Oh, go ahead.
So, from what I've read, and we've spent a lot of time studying this, what happened in Africa is, and I've met many people who have never had any access to the internet outside of Facebook. They've never had an email account before they got their, they basically lived their lives through Facebook. When Facebook bought Instagram, they realized that there was perhaps more value to extract in people who were approaching life in a much more visual way, and it seemed that there was even more user-friendly to some people than Facebook in some instances. And then when they bought WhatsApp, you know, which really is now targeting developing markets in Africa versus Messenger, which is much more developed markets, they realized there could be a way for them to create an ecosystem around all three, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram. Whereas in our usage, we realize that the kinds of influential people who can lead to advertisers, which is how we make money, are really people who are obsessed with Instagram. So as a result, one of the things we're going to do is try to migrate a lot of our Facebook content and users to Instagram, because that's what we feel we could own better than other competing and existing and more successful media companies in Africa.
Awesome. So I know we don't have time for all the questions. We're going to start crafting our own how might we statements. And Gordon has some recommendations about how we can do that.
All right, so the ideal toolkit identifies a couple of things to note when you're creating how might we statements, and some of it are amp up the good, amp up the good in sort of the problem space, remove the bad, explore the opposite, right? Question the assumption, for instance, if you will, that Instagram needs data, or go after adjectives, ID unexpected resources, create an analogy from the need or the context. So you could take the digital space and create an analogy to compare with Instagram use, change the status quo, and you can further break a problem into multiple sort of chunks and then apply the how might we statement to it. So
actually, I was giving a keynote speech at the Siebes University in Accra, and one of the girls who was working reception is now an influencer on True Africa. Her name is Nadia Jima, and she has over 50,000 followers. because she's cool, she talks about her lifestyle, she knows a lot of people in Accra, and across Accra, she has people who follow her. And the fact that we were able to deputize her and to have her participate in our platform, it made us bigger. We picked up, I think, 2,000 followers when she took over our Instagram, and she picked up a few followers as well, because now we open her up to the True Africa audience. So it's interesting that you're approaching it in that way, because it's about the who in order to get to the how.
Great. Any more feedback?
No, I just want to say that one of the things about how my we statements is to make sure that they're not too broad or that too narrow. And I thought this was reasonable, if you will.
Great.
Can I,
Yes, sir?
Yeah.
I have like one last thing to say about how my quiz. It's just that don't solve your problem in your question. It's like, you know, I've gone around the room sometimes, and this is for people who are not talking, it's like speaking up right now. So if your how might we has a solution in the problem statement itself, like that's not a good problem statement. I think that's what Gordon meant by don't let it be too broad, so that you're not focusing on one kind of user group or not focusing on one kind of a design experience that you're trying to redesign. Don't let it be too narrow that you can't have more than one idea when you go to ideation.
So if I said, how might we pass Instagram download codes out to university students in Lagos so that they join Instagram? Good or bad, how might we statement?
Bad how might we statement.
Okay. Anyone out there, what about how might we increase our Instagram followers? Good or bad?
I think that's too broad in that sense. I would think, in that case, think about an user. Like, and one of the ways that it helps me usually when I do these things is think about an extreme use case. Because extreme users are people whose needs are amplified. You know, I think there was one good point brought up from this table is that people who don't have, you know, access to internet all the time, how do you engage them? That's an extreme user. You know, because their needs are much more amplified. So when you solve for an extreme user, when you create a problem statement around an extreme user, you can solve for the rest of the groups. So.
Great. So who thinks that they listed a bad how might we statement? Based on those too broad, too hot, too cold, or everyone feels pretty solid about what they have? Everyone feel pretty good? We're being honest? Okay, if you are a group that listed multiple how might we statements, please circle the one that you think is best, because that's the one that you're subsequently going to work on. So quickly in your groups do that. Our next exercise is brainstorming, and Mauni's going to share with us a couple of rules about brainstorming.
Rules. Ideation is supposed to be fun. I know rules don't sound like fun, but I promise this will give you a productive ideation session. So most impactful ideas, you know, who do you think like they come from? Do they come from one individual or do they come from teams? Like how many of you think teams? Okay, so, you know, so then how do you use this design thinking process and ideation process and brainstorming time to make sure that you're having a fruitful ideation? So the goal of an ideation session in a design thinking, you know, scenario is not to create one great idea, but to create a volume of ideas that you can later test out to prototyping. So what kind of team dynamics and rules do you have to follow in a diverse team that's sitting at your table? You know, there might be an engineering background, a design person, and a business person sitting at the table. So how do you make sure that the conversation you're having and the brainstorming session that you're having in this group is fruitful so that you can create a volume of ideas? I love how Gordon talked about creative confidence. One of the things IDEO believes in is that everyone is creative. So how do you bring these creative people to a table and make sure that you have creative ideas? There are some rules or suggestions that IDEO makes. So one of them is defer judgment. That's the first thing, defer judgment. Do not say no, rather say yes and. So if any of you have been to an improv comedy school or like have attended a session, you'll notice that people just build on each other. They don't say, oh, you're stupid. You know, when someone says an idea at your table, do not call them out for, you know, stupid or that this will never work. So you cannot say those things. So that's the rules for today. It's like you can't say no. You can only say yes and. So that's the first rule. And it segues nicely into the second one. Build on top, top of each other's ideas. If someone in your team has an idea on about how to create more content, if it's inviting celebrities to post more, so build upon it. May say that create a party of celebrities to hang out at a place. Build more ideas on this, same ideas. That's the second rule. And the third one is be visual. So when you're trying to communicate your idea to someone in your team, it's easy to go into a whole story and a monologue about it, but make sure you keep it short. And the best way to keep express your ideas in the shortest amount of time is to actually draw it out. So, pictures speak more than 1,000 words. So if you have great skills as a visual designer, make stick figures and express your idea that way better. And then the fourth one is make sure you're only having one conversation at the table. When you're in a group of like 5 or 6, it's easy for 2 of you to start having one conversation, one idea, and the rest of them are on another idea. Then you're not having a productive session. So make sure there's only one conversation happening, at the team. And the final one I want to say is have fun. That's like one of the roots of brainstorming. Brainstorming is the most energetic part of the session. So have fun, go for quantity. Do not start thinking about how I can implement a particular idea. Go for quantity, and you can do that by being wild and not thinking about constraints right now. Think that you have magic at your expense, or everything in the world that you need is at your dispense. So how would you go for these wild ideas and create 1,000 ideas in this next 10 minutes?